This story was a few years back when I was hauling a load of auto parts from Detroit to Phoenix. I decided to push through the night to get to my delivery spot early the next morning. Around 3 a.m., I was cruising down I-40 through the Navajo Nation in northeast Arizona. The roads were completely deserted, not a single other vehicle in sight. I was totally alone out there in the vast desert. Up ahead, I noticed what I thought was a broken-down vehicle or some roadkill on the side of the road. But as I got closer, I realized it was a woman in her 20s or 30s, waving her arms frantically like she needed help. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. She rushed up to my door in a panic. I cracked the window, keeping the door locked, and she started screaming about her boyfriend chasing her, trying to kill her. She begged me to let her in the truck. Her story was pretty far-fetched, but the raw fear on her face seemed genuine. So I unlocked the door and let her scramble into the cab. She huddled against the door, eyes darting around like she expected her psycho boyfriend to appear at any moment. I floored it, and we took off down the empty highway as she sobbed out this crazy tale about her boyfriend snapping, beating her, chasing her at high speeds, her having to bail out of her own car. She was utterly convinced her life was in danger. After a while, she finally started to relax a bit once we'd put many miles between us and wherever this unhinged boyfriend had last been. That's when I got a really good look at her hands streaked with what looked unnervingly like dried blood. The horrible truth slowly dawned on me. This woman wasn't running from someone else. She was the danger, and I'd fallen right into her trap by picking her up in the middle of nowhere. I was now locked in this cab alone, with what was potentially an unhinged killer or criminal. For the next few hours until dawn, I had to keep driving, playing along to keep her calm while trying to find a way to get us to safety and other people around. She went eerily silent, just piercing me with these dead, predatory stares that sent chills through me. Finally, I saw an exit up ahead for a truck stop, a public place where I could get away from her. As we neared the exit, she seemed to pick up on the sound of the rig slowing down. That's when she turned to me with the most haunting, remorseless look and basically confessed that she was disturbed, and I'd made a grave mistake picking her up. I'll never forget the sick feeling that washed over me in that moment, realizing what I'd put myself in the middle of. It was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. I've been driving trucks for a decade, and you see some strange things out on the road. This one night, though, it still haunts me. I was on a long haul from Texas to California, and I decided to take a lesser-known route to avoid some construction. The road was an old, mostly abandoned stretch of highway running through the desert. It was about 1 a.m., and there was a full moon, but the landscape was pitch black except for what my headlights illuminated. As I drove, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road up ahead. It's not uncommon to see hitchhikers, but this person was just standing still, not even attempting to flag me down. As I got closer, I could see it was a woman. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, and her hair was a mess. Something about her gave me the creeps. Maybe it was the way she was just staring, motionless. I slowed down a bit, but decided not to stop. My gut was screaming at me to keep going. As I passed her, I couldn't help but glance in my rearview mirror. She was gone. One moment she was there, and the next just vanished. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I kept driving, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. About half an hour later, I needed to stretch my legs and take a leak, so I pulled off to the side of the road. I stepped out and walked a few feet away from the truck. The desert was eerily quiet, with only the sound of the wind. I finished up and turned to head back to my truck, and that's when I saw her again, standing right next to my rig. Same dress, same messy hair, just staring at me. I froze. My first thought was that she'd somehow hitched a ride on my trailer. But how? And why? I forced myself to move, quickly walking back to the cab. I didn't say anything, just climbed in and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine and pulled back onto the road. I drove for hours, not stopping, not even for coffee. Eventually, I saw the lights of a truck stop in the distance and decided I needed to be around people. I pulled in, parked, and practically ran inside. The place was almost empty, just a couple of truckers and the cashier. I got myself a coffee and sat down, trying to calm my nerves. After a while, I started talking to the cashier. I mentioned seeing the woman and how she seemed to just disappear and reappear. His face went pale, and he asked me to describe her. When I did, he nodded slowly and said, "You're not the first one to see her. They say she was a trucker's wife back in the 50s. She got tired of waiting for him to come back from his hauls and decided to follow him. She ended up getting hit by a truck on this very highway. Ever since, she's been seen by drivers, especially those who are alone and driving at night." I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to brush it off as just a story to scare travelers, but it felt too real. I stayed at that truck stop until morning, then continued my journey in daylight. I was on a routine run transporting electronics from Seattle to San Diego. To avoid some nasty weather, I took a lesser-known route through Nevada, a decision I soon regretted. It was around 3 a.m., and I was deep into the desolate stretches of the Nevada desert. The road was empty, just a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the barren landscape. My rig was cruising smoothly when the check engine light flickered on. Almost immediately, I felt a loss of power. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping it was something minor. After popping the hood and taking a quick look, nothing seemed obviously wrong. I was no mechanic, but I knew enough to see that I wasn't fixing this on my own. I got back into the cab and was about to call for roadside assistance when I noticed a faint, flickering light in the distance. It looked like an old diner, a beacon of hope in the middle of nowhere. I decided to chance it and drive towards the light. The engine strained, but I managed to make it. The place was a rundown diner with a couple of rusty gas pumps out front. The neon sign, flickering "Open 24 hours," cast an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. The building itself looked like it hadn't seen any significant upkeep in decades. Inside, the diner was just as decrepit. There was a middle-aged waitress behind the counter, looking like she was stuck in time, along with a few other patrons who seemed out of place, almost like ghosts from another era. The whole atmosphere was unnerving, but I needed coffee and a plan. As I sat there nursing my cup, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The customers barely moved or spoke, just sat there in silence, staring into their drinks. I decided to check my truck again, hoping the engine might have miraculously fixed itself. When I stepped outside, I saw a man standing next to my truck. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and his eyes had a wild, haunted look. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he walked away into the darkness. Shaken, I got back in my truck and drove off, ignoring the eerie warnings ringing in my head. About 20 minutes later, my headlights caught something on the road ahead. It was a semi-truck, jackknifed and wrecked, blocking the highway. The cab was crushed and the trailer was overturned, spilling its contents. There were no emergency lights, no sign of any help, just this wreckage in the middle of nowhere. I stopped and got out, hoping to find someone I could help. The cab was empty, the driver nowhere in sight. The ground around the wreck was marked with deep gouges and scratches, as if something massive had torn through the area. I felt a deep sense of dread as I examined the scene. I quickly got back into my truck and drove away, my mind racing with thoughts of the wreck and the strange man at the diner. As dawn broke, I finally reached a town and reported the wreck to the local authorities. They seemed skeptical, but promised to check it out. A few days later, I was back on the road, unable to shake the experience. I checked the news and found no reports of the wrecked truck or any missing drivers. It was as if the incident had never happened. I avoided that route from then on, but the memory lingered. I've been a trucker for about 15 years now. Seen a lot of weird stuff on the road, but nothing quite like what happened to me 3 years ago. I drive mostly at night, less traffic, and I find it kind of peaceful. That night, I was hauling a load from Denver to Kansas City. It was around 2 a.m., and I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, driving down this long stretch of highway with no other cars in sight. Out of nowhere, my GPS started glitching. It's not unusual for the signal to get weak in remote areas, but this was different. The screen was flickering, and it kept rerouting me to this small road off the highway. I figured it might be some kind of shortcut, so I took the turn. The road was narrow and winding, and I started feeling uneasy. My headlights were barely cutting through the darkness, and the trees on either side seemed to close in on me. I was about to turn back when I saw a faint light up ahead. As I got closer, I realized it was a small gas station. It looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s, but the lights were on, and the sign said it was open. I pulled in, hoping to grab a coffee and maybe get my GPS sorted. The place was eerily quiet. There was an old pickup truck parked at one of the pumps, but no sign of anyone around. I walked inside, and the bell over the door jingled. The interior was just as old as the outside, with faded posters on the walls and a faint smell of mildew. There was a guy behind the counter, head down, reading a newspaper. He didn't look up when I walked in, which struck me as odd. I cleared my throat and asked if they had any coffee. The guy just pointed to an old coffee machine in the corner without saying a word. I poured myself a cup and noticed a bulletin board with missing persons flyers. Lots of them. More than you'd expect for a small town. It gave me the creeps, so I hurried back to the counter to pay. The guy still didn't look up. I left a few bucks on the counter and got out of there as fast as I could. Back in my truck, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. I got back on the road, but the GPS was still acting weird. It kept insisting I go further down the narrow road deeper into the woods. I decided to ignore it and get back to the main highway. That's when I saw the lights in my rearview mirror. It was the old pickup from the gas station, and it was tailing me closely. I sped up, but it matched my speed. I tried to let it pass, but it just stayed right on my bumper. The road was too narrow to pull over, and there was no shoulder, just trees and darkness. My heart was pounding, and I started thinking about those missing persons flyers. I knew I had to lose this guy, but it wasn't easy on such a winding road. I finally saw a wider spot and gunned it, taking a sharp turn. The pickup sped past me, tires screeching. I thought I was in the clear until I saw it again, parked on the side of the road up ahead, lights off. I didn't slow down. I just kept driving, heart racing, until I finally saw the lights of a small town in the distance. I pulled into a well-lit truck stop and parked as close to the building as I could. I ran inside looking for anyone to tell what happened. The clerk at the counter must have seen the panic on my face. She asked if I was okay, and I quickly told her about the gas station and the pickup truck. She looked at me like I was crazy and said there's no gas station on that road, never has been. I insisted, but she just shook her head and told me to sit down, have some coffee and calm down. I never found out what was up with that gas station or the pickup truck. But I know what I saw. I've avoided that route ever since. It's been years, but I still get chills thinking about it. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.